What's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Tuya Q.A.R, or Queen Anne's Revenge. This is a modern slip joint designed by Andi Thiel, who's actually done a couple different Tuya knife designs at this point, but this is the first one I've had the opportunity to check out myself. Really enjoying it so far, so definitely looking forward to checking out some of his other designs in the future. This one comes to me by way of the Apex pass-around group, but you can get it in this configuration with the green micarta covers for $199 over on their website, which I'll link to in the description of the video. Now there is an ultra limited version with only 43 pieces in total that has crystallized titanium on the handles, a bunch of different colors of crystallized titanium as well, depending on which serial number you end up selecting. That one's $279. But at the time I'm recording this video, it seems like they're down to their very last one. So if you're watching this after this video goes live, very high likelihood only available in the micarta version now, at least directly from Tuya. Now, I actually prefer this one a little bit. I think a lower price point at that $199 also has a more traditional feel to it with the micarta covers, and I think the handle design and blade design lend themselves nicely to that traditional feel, although this is still a ultra modern slip joint. And so for those that aren't super familiar with slip joints, what makes this one a modern versus a traditional is the construction itself. So with traditionals, you're going to have pinned construction, but with modern slip joints, you get a tooled construction, essentially meaning that we have screws. So we have body screws, we have a pivot screw, and they also went ultra modern with the materials themselves. Have a titanium bolster, Point M390 on the blade, stuff that you wouldn't typically see with a traditional slip joint. They also took some modern conveniences, since they went the modern route anyway, threw on that lanyard hole, which isn't something you typically see, although it's not unheard of. It is pretty rare to see a lanyard hole on a traditional slip joint. We also have the addition of a stop pin on the internal portion. Not sure if that's going to come through on camera or not. Instead of utilizing a kick out in the tang to stop that blade from closing on the back spring, this utilizes a stop pin. Now, a lot of traditionalists prefer without the stop pin because it does affect the acoustics of the knife itself, or for a slip joint, the walk and talk. But I think this one still has an excellent sounding closing sound, and so great acoustics on the closing as well, which we can hear here. And so still a nice snap to it, just sounds a little bit different. It definitely dampens the sound a little bit, but it's not a sound that I necessarily don't like. I actually love the sound of just hearing a slip joint open and close, whether or not it has that pinned construction. And the stop pin does serve some utility in ultimately extending the lifespan of your knife. It really not going to be something super noticeable over the first 20,000 opening and closings of the knife, but eventually that tang does wear down, and what can happen is the spring or the blade ends up hitting that back spring when that happens, and so you can chip it, you can roll it, or just dull the edge overall. And so once you get to that point, there's really no saving it. And so really nice to have that stop pin for the overall life cycle, although you're not going to notice for several years of EDCing this knife, and so not something that's really a deal breaker for me in either direction. Overall, I think a great looking knife. Like I said, it has that traditional handle shape, great spear point style blade, and has a really traditional look to it. And so great nail nick here for our deployment. We'll take a look at that a little bit further along. In terms of the sizing of this knife, it's about 7 inches overall, which is actually pretty large for a slip joint knife. For a modern locking knife, that's pretty average size. Maybe you'd call it a medium, even kind of going into that smaller territory. But for a slip joint, it's a little bit on the larger size, so nice sizing on here. 4 inches in our closed position, which gives us a really generous handle for a full 4-finger grip for my hands at least. And I think even for some larger hands, you can see I'm in a pretty relaxed grip, pretty spread out, don't feel ultra cramped. So if you have larger hands than me, good chance you'll still be able to get all 4 fingers on here. And this has some of the best ergos on a knife handle that I've felt in a long time. Really fills out the hand nicely with that wider grip. And then it just fits naturally into my hand, kind of fits like a glove, I guess is how you describe it. No hot spots whatsoever. And it really feels like it's built to work. I could use this for an hour and not develop any hot spots. And so really enjoy the ergos, at least in my hand, and how that feels in my hand. And so in terms of our blade, we get a 3-inch M390 spear point style blade. Nice flat grind on there with a belt satin finish. Swedge at the tip. We have a 90-degree edge the rest of the way, so that is a little bit sharp and grabby. Not something I necessarily mind, but it is kind of nice when you see those knocked back. It feels a little bit nicer on your thumb. But I do kind of prefer the look of that sharp cut off of a 90-degree edge, so that looks nice as well. Got fluted bolsters, really nice shield on here. Don't know how I'd describe that. In fact, when I first saw it, I thought, you know, that's a generic shield shape. We got a shield-shaped shield. And so I got curious what other people called it, because they don't actually list anything on the website. And so I got curious what other people call it. I looked up RJ's Knives videos, and he called it an acorn shape, which is definitely an acorn shape, missing the cap, but I can see where he was going with that. Then I checked out Tim over at Tim's School of Fish's video, and he described it as a guitar pick. He actually had a guitar pick there. That definitely fit as well. I'm going to stick with shield-shaped shield. I like that. And so it's got a nice shape to it, though. It's wider, which is nice for this wide handle. I think it fills the space really nicely. And so just a great looking overall design. Very minimal billboarding, which is something you'd expect from a slip joint anyway. And Tuya always does a great job, but they did throw their logo right there tucked next to the handle. And then the maker's mark on the back, which is that anchor. That's Andi Thiel's maker mark. And so really minimal in terms of the branding. And just a great little blade shape here. I love a spear point blade. Great action on here. Nice walk and talk. I mentioned that nail nick, but the blade itself is very pinchable. You can really pinch at any point in this handle, and it's got a decent pull to it. So depending on where you grab it, if you're grabbing at the nail nick, I'd say it's about a 6, a little bit on the heavier side. And so still a nice kind of consistent pull to it. But the further you get out from that pivot, the lighter it gets. So if we go right up near the tip, I say it's closer to about a 5, and it's a lot easier to open. So if you're struggling to open it at the nail nick, I would suggest just kind of moving up, grabbing it up here near the tip, and you get that lighter pull here, which feels a little bit easier to open. And it's a really consistent pull all the way across. Really nice walk and talk here. We'll stop talking for a moment so we can hear what that sounds like, although I already showed the closing portion. So really, really satisfying acoustics on here as well, especially in the fully open and the closed position. It has kind of a soft half stop, and so you can kind of hear that. I wouldn't describe it as a lazy half stop though, because it definitely stops there. It has a really dedicated spot that is stopping in. It rolls to that stop every time. I'm never worried about it closing on my hand and just blowing past the half stop, which is what I would describe as a lazy half stop, which is important because a lot of times when I'm closing slip joints, you can see I leave my fingers in the path of the blade, don't move them until it gets to that half stop positioning. And so although it sounds a little bit soft, it doesn't snap there with as much authority that it snaps into those other positions. It's still stopping there consistently, and you don't have to worry about it blowing past. That is something that I would imagine you can adjust with this pivot a little bit. It's going to affect the pull as well. So if we tighten that up, maybe we get a harder stop at the half stop positioning, but you're also going to have a slightly harder pull. Now I didn't tinker with that at all because this isn't my knife to keep. I have to pass it on to the next channel when I'm done with it. But that is one of the nice things about this modern construction, is that you can make these minute adjustments if it's not exactly to your liking. And this all comes down to preference. I prefer a slightly heavier pull. I wouldn't have minded like a 7.5 to an 8 on this one rather than a 5 to 6 depending on where you're grabbing it. But some people prefer this lighter pull, and with the modern construction you can loosen up that pivot a little bit. You want to make sure you're doing it not so loose that you're going to get play with the blade, but loosen it up a little bit to lighten the pull experience. And so one of the really nice things about getting this modern construction. Now this knife weighs in at 3.25 ounces, so not ultra lightweight, but it feels good in hand. It's not ultra heavy either. Feels really well balanced. And like I said, I love the ergos on this one. It just happens to fit my hand like a glove. And so really, really impressed with this one so far. Definitely excited to check out more of his designs in the future. Now, like a lot of Tuya knives, we do get a leather pouch to go with it. And so not your traditional slip that you might get with a slip joint. It's got a little bit more room, and that's because these are somewhat generic. They have a bunch of different colors and maybe a couple of different sizes, but they're made to fit their modern locking knives as well. That are going to have a pocket clip and maybe a little bit larger and more robust than this one. And so you get this really nice soft supple leather on the interior, really generous sizing. I like their slips well enough. I think they're great looking, and so nice that it comes along with that as well. That's it for this one. Would love to hear your thoughts on this knife down in the comments below. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, or checking out some of my other videos. All help the channel out a ton. I'll leave a link to where you can find this down in the description, and I hope you have a great one. Take care.